Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Warehouse 13, Season 2, Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story picks up right where Lena, disguised as Claudia, rescues James, leaving Arty seemingly dead in an explosion. But is Arty really dead? Of course not. As Pete and Micah mourn, a black cloud rises from the ruins, sparking electricity. It transforms into Arty, much to their joy. Overwhelmed, they ask how he survived. Arty reaches into his pocket and finds a Phoenix badge, clearly left for him by James. Pete's face darkens immediately. He said one life saved means someone else had to die. Just as Pete starts coughing, they realize he was merely choking on smoke. The scene shifts, and one of Irene's bodyguards dies, smoke pouring from his smelly mouth. The three hear an explosion above and rush out, assuming Irene perished. Instead, they find her lying not far away. She must have jumped from the car in a panic. Meanwhile, James and Lena steal a person from the warehouse's statue section. To protect this person's eyes from being blinded by sunlight, they cover him with fabric. The statue section is full of dangerous individuals, and with this person at his side, James has gained a powerful ally. After taking Irene to the hospital, Arty has a dream where Irene urges him to find Claudia and her brother Joshua. Meanwhile, Lena remains undercover at the warehouse, with no one suspecting her true identity. Pete reviews surveillance footage but struggles to believe Claudia is the traitor. Micah, though reluctant to accept it, knows the evidence is undeniable. If she weren't guilty, why would she run? Soon, Arty returns, exhausted from his trek. The explosion had damaged the pipes, forcing him to climb 15 floors to reach the office area, implying Warehouse 13 is mostly underground. Arty hurriedly packs, saying he must find Claudia. Claudia has only one relative, her brother Joshua, who works at a European quantum physics institute in Switzerland. They wondered if Claudia and Joshua were working with James. That can only be confirmed in Switzerland. Pete and Micah want to go with Arty, but he refuses, leaving them behind to investigate if James has stolen anything else from the warehouse. After Arty leaves, Pete uses a sustained spectrum analyzer to search the area but finds no clues. Its detection range only covers the past 5 hours. Micah notices drag marks in the statue section and checks the freezing records, discovering James has taken a living person, Wells. Wells is a renowned British author famous for his wildly imaginative science fiction. But why would a writer be kept in the statue section? It's baffling. Micah retrieves some of Wells' works from the warehouse, hoping to uncover clues. Meanwhile, Pete finds a news article about a burglary at Wells' London residence 3 months ago. Oddly, nothing was reported stolen. But if someone's belongings are missing without explanation, the next logical step is to find the person and ask them directly. Pete concludes that James must have orchestrated the burglary to locate something belonging to Wells. Unable to find it, he resurrected Wells himself. If that's the case, James is likely in London. Without hesitation, Pete and Micah set off for London. The scene shifts to the European Quantum Physics Institute in Switzerland, where Joshua receives a video call from her sister Claudia. She warns him not to believe James since he is a fraud. Just then, a professor enters, asking Joshua for help moving something in the lab. After stepping out, the professor encounters him. Startled, he quickly hides. Removing a thimble-like device from his finger, the professor transforms into James. Obviously, he's for something out of Joshua. Meanwhile, Pete and Micah had already arrived at Wells's former residence. Now a popular tourist attraction, the place was packed with visitors. Pete couldn't resist chatting with some pretty ladies while they discovered Edward's name in the guest book, a name that also happens to be the protagonist of one of Wells's novels. Convinced Wells might actually be there, they entered the building, only to find Wells casually boasting to an audience. Pete froze for a moment, then stormed up to arrest the man, only to realize it was an actor impersonating Wells. Even Micah pointed out that his fake mustache was a dead giveaway. The tour guide explained that the real Wells passed away in 1946. However, Pete's gut told him the elusive Wells was somehow still connected to this place. Meanwhile, Claudia had rushed to Switzerland, constantly feeling like someone was tailing her. At one point, she managed to knock out her pursuer, only to find out it was Arty. Back in London, Pete and Micah cleared out all visitors from the house and began investigating. In the hospital, the pieces of the puzzle finally came together for Irene. She realized the true traitor was none other than Lena. As Micah searched for clues, Pete noticed the doorknob turning. When he opened the door, the pretty lady from earlier stood there, saying she had accidentally left her notebook behind. On the other hand, Arty nursed his head and asked Claudia what she hit him with. She nonchalantly replied she used her fist. Claudia clarified that she wasn't the mole, and Arty chose to trust her. Together, they decided to look for Joshua. In a surprising turn, Pete ended up getting cozy with the pretty lady. Soon after, Micah received a video call from Arty, who couldn't believe that Wells had escaped, and clarified that Wells was actually a woman. Micah immediately updated Pete, only for the pretty lady to suddenly pull a gun on him. It turned out that she was, in fact, Wells. Years ago, she had worked in Warehouse 12 and was responsible for transferring Tesla's gun there after meeting Nikola Tesla at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Just as Wells was basking in her villainous monologue, Pete turned the tables and subdued her sexy body. Wells, however, cryptically mentioned how being stuck as a bronze statue for over a century had given her plenty of time to think. She revealed that while immobilized, her mind remained perfectly active, a truly torturous experience. When pressed about what James was after, she led Pete and Micah to a drawer containing a small key. After closing the window blinds, an ancient mechanism revealed a hidden chamber. Inside was a single vest that looked rather seductive. Despite its appearance, its purpose was unclear. Pete noticed another switch on the device, flipped it, and activated an anti-gravity field that filled the room. Oddly, Wells seemed unaffected, thanks to her custom magnetic boots. She casually donned the vest, which amplified her powers, and left. Before departing, she remarked that the sci-fi novels attributed to her weren't actually written by her, but by her brother, with her merely providing innovative ideas. At the research lab, Joshua and the professor were busy extracting something from the lab. Claudia and Arty arrived just in time to notice the professor wearing a thimble on his finger. Claudia lunged forward and snatched it off, revealing James's true identity. James shoved Joshua off a platform, but thankfully, he landed safely on a pile of soft tubing. With everyone distracted, James escaped in the chaos. Elsewhere, Pete and Micah were still chatting on the ceiling, suspended in the anti-gravity field. Pete theorized it must be electromagnetic in nature, but couldn't spot any obvious sources nearby. All they could see were the lights. Acting on a hunch, Pete shot one of the light bulb sockets, instantly neutralizing the anti-gravity field. The two tumbled back to the ground and hurriedly updated Arty on the situation. Arty instructed Claudia to hack into the warehouse's system to check what inventions Wells might have left behind. In mere minutes, she uncovered an item, the stealth vest. This vest allowed its wearer to move at superhuman speeds, essentially becoming invisible to the naked eye. Arty immediately realized Wells' plan to use the vest to infiltrate the Escher vault in Warehouse 13. The vest was powered by antimatter, which explained why James had stolen a box containing it earlier. The Escher vault housed the personal belongings of past bronzed individuals, with its labyrinthine design of twisting staircases and shifting corridors, making it almost impossible to navigate without a guide. However, with the stealth vest, Wells could traverse a year's worth of walking in just a few seconds, making the impossible possible. Clearly, James's ultimate goal was the Escher vault, and if Claudia wasn't the mole, that left Lena as the only suspect. Warehouse 13 was once again on the brink of disaster. At this moment, Irene made an unexpected visit to Lena's villa. Strangely, she noticed Lena's eyes were unnaturally dark and lifeless. Without hesitation, she strangled her. A white pearl dropped from Lena's ear. Then, Irene held up a piece of feet-wiping tissue paper for Lena to sniff, reviving her. It turned out Lena hadn't become James's mole willingly. The pearl, known as the Pearl of Wisdom, had been controlling her. Victims implanted with this pearl would experience nightmares on the first night. Lena recalled having a terrifying nightmare exactly 1 month ago. Clearly, that's when James had secretly tampered with her. Anyone possessed by the pearl could be manipulated entirely. Only now did Lena remember the terrible things she had done. At the villa, she was alone while the agents were all out of town, leaving the warehouse completely unguarded. Meanwhile, James and Wells successfully arrived at the door of the Escher Vault's underground chamber. After James cracked the entrance code, Wells activated the stealth vest and disappeared instantly. Before long, the others returned. Arty and Claudia, traveling together, suddenly stopped. Arty sensed something wrong. He threw an apple ahead, and it exploded immediately. It was a chameleon landmine, a device that could camouflage with its surroundings before detonating. They were forced to turn back when Claudia abruptly stopped them again, saying, "That's Dante's death mask, and it shouldn't be here." Arty threw a piece of paper at it, triggering a wall of fire. The mask belonged to Dante, the Italian poet who wrote the Divine Comedy, which describes hellish scenes reminiscent of these flames. With chameleon mines ahead and Dante's mask behind, they had no choice but to climb. Elsewhere, Pete contacted Arty, who warned him to watch out for traps. Pete and Micah decided to use a zip line to get across. It was quick and efficient. Arty, watching from a distance, envied them. He muttered that if he'd known, he would have used the zip line instead of climbing. Meanwhile, Wells exited the Escher vault, her stealth vest no longer functional. She explained the vest was overloaded and broke down before turning on James and cuffing him with handcuffs. Arty and Claudia arrived just in time to witness the real Wells appear, sever James's necklace with a swift slash, and then escape. Without the mystical necklace, James's blood turned into a powerful acid, corroding his veins. As he lay dying, James surprisingly apologized to Arty, confessing that his malicious actions were driven by an inner emptiness. Deep down, he had always considered Arty a friend. After uttering his final apology, James disintegrated into ashes. With the dust settled, the now depleted stealth vest was discovered nearby, while Wells's whereabouts remained unknown. Although Lena's transformation into a mole was unintentional, Claudia continued to harbor resentment toward her, constantly picking fights. To console her, Arty gifted Claudia an original Farnsworth communicator, personally used by Farnsworth himself. Later, Irene accompanied Arty to the entrance of the Escher vault. After cracking the code, they retrieved 2 pairs of glasses. Arty explained that the glasses were the only way to navigate the labyrinthine maze of the underground chamber. 20 years ago, a curious warehouse agent had ventured into the vault without them and was never seen again. Inside, they discovered several missing artifacts, including Wells's jewelry box, ring, and compact mirror. In a restaurant, Wells stared at her compact mirror with a sorrowful expression, hinting at a mysterious backstory. Pete and Micah visited the post office every Tuesday to pick up packages. This week, Micah received items sent by her parents, sparking nostalgic memories of her childhood. Pete, on the other hand, received nothing, leaving him disappointed. Meanwhile, Arty decided it was time to enhance security. He tasked Claudia with helping Lena install motion sensors, but Claudia, still upset with Lena, refused outright. At the same time, strange incidents were occurring in a town near Detroit. A burglar broke into a house and brazenly stole items, only to be apprehended by a mysterious figure. After a flash of electricity, the burglar was ejected from the house like a cannonball, slamming through a wall. Back at Lena's villa, Micah was as joyful as a child, reminiscing about her childhood memories triggered by her package. Arty then arrived with a stack of documents. He explained, there have been multiple cases in Detroit of wrongdoers being punished. For instance, a drug dealer was discovered wrapped around a flagpole atop a tall building. He believed no one could climb such a high building, let alone bend the metal of a flagpole. He turned to Pete and Micah, saying if he knew the answer, he wouldn't need the 2 of them. After leaving, Arty advised Lena to make amends with Claudia, emphasizing that reconciliation would benefit everyone. Shortly after, Lena experienced a sudden bout of dizziness, but it passed quickly, leaving her seemingly unharmed. Pete and Micah quickly arrived at the site of the 3rd incident, the spot where someone had been launched like a cannonball the day before. There had been 3 bizarre occurrences in total, and each time, the same police officer was the first to arrive at the scene. The officer explained that he had been patrolling the area when he heard 3 gunshots followed by a massive boom. Upon arriving, he found a large hole in the ground, suggesting that whoever caused the hole must have escaped through it. Pete noticed 3 flattened bullets on the ground, wondering if the culprit was impervious to bullets. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Arty was installing sensors when he turned around and saw James. In the blink of an eye, the figure vanished. He wondered if he was seeing ghosts now. Lena approached Claudia, trying to reconcile with her, but Claudia ignored her completely. The officer took Pete and Micah to a local restaurant, claiming it had the best pie in town. The restaurant owner was also the president of the neighborhood watch. Hoping to learn more about the town, Pete and Micah asked her some questions, but she said she needed to run to the bank and suggested they speak to Sheldon, another member of the watch. When Pete and Micah asked Sheldon about the strange incidents, he exclaimed his disbelief. This got Pete thinking, could the officer be involved since he had always been the first on the scene? Suspicious, they decided to follow him. Soon, the officer received another tip and rushed to a new crime scene with Pete and Micah close behind. At the scene, a group of thieves was in the middle of a robbery. By the time Pete and Micah arrived, the thieves were already dead, and the officer was crouched down, inspecting their bodies. Pete confronted him about what he used to kill these people. The officer denied it, saying it wasn't him. He just got an anonymous tip, probably from the same person who reported the previous incidents. That's why he always gets here first. As they spoke, the 3 of them heard a noise from downstairs. When they went to investigate, they caught a glimpse of a Superman in purple tights flying away in a flash. Pete, a die-hard fan of the Superman comic series, was instantly enamored. He explained that this underpants Superman was also known as the Masked Iron Man, a top-tier hero from the Silver Age of comics. Wanting to learn more, Pete and Micah headed to a bookstore to look up information about the Masked Iron Man. Pete excitedly pointed out that the hero's costume matched perfectly with the one from the comics. He said he knew everything about the Iron Man, and he had read every issue except for 46. He even began quoting one of the character's lines, "There are only two types of criminals in this world, parasites and cowards." Hearing this, Micah suddenly remembered hearing the same line before, from Sheldon at the restaurant. Back at the warehouse, Arty kept seeing visions of James. He shared his experience with Claudia and Lena. Suddenly, he had a realization. Could one of the warehouse artifacts be causing him to see the ghost of someone who had passed away? He asked Claudia to search the database, and sure enough, there was an artifact called Rasputin's Prayer Rope, which was said to bring the dead back to life. Arty asked Lena to retrieve it. Meanwhile, Pete and Micah confronted Sheldon, asking why he knew the Masked Iron Man's catchphrase. Flustered, Sheldon exclaimed, "It's not him," but in his panic, he accidentally crushed the cup he was holding. Pete and Micah exchanged knowing looks. If it wasn't him, then who else could it be? Sheldon admitted that he had always been a comic book fan and dreamed of using his fists to punish bad guys. His transformation into a vigilante was partly fueled by a childhood hatred for injustice and partly by a robbery at his own home. Without warning, Sheldon ran off to take his collection, smashing through his own window. Micah was stunned, wondering why he couldn't just use the door. Pete chuckled and explained that superheroes never take the stairs. Surprisingly, this seemed to make sense. Outside, they spotted Underpants Superman standing on a wall, shouting that he will destroy all evildoers and no one can stop him. With that, he clasped his hands together and unleashed a shockwave that sent Pete and Micah flying like Barbie toys before shooting into the sky. Pete was awestruck and asked if he could have his autograph. Micah, however, noticed his hands trembling. She speculated that the artifact might be causing side effects. Based on the Superman's abilities, sometimes bulletproof, sometimes able to fly, she concluded that he could alter his body's density. In the warehouse, Arty retrieved a cleaning device, explaining that it could neutralize the psychological effects triggered by certain artifacts. He went on to describe Rasputin, the infamous Russian mystic. There are rumors that his smelly sausage was nearly 50 centimeters long and could wrap around his waist. Arty explained that Rasputin wasn't truly unkillable. He had been killed during the first assassination attempt, but was resurrected using his prayer rope. Arty threw the rope into the cleaning device, confident that James's ghost would now be gone for good. To his shock, James reappeared, proving that Rasputin's prayer rope had nothing to do with the visions. Realizing the mystery was far from over, Arty sighed and returned to composing a song for his father. Pete and Micah contacted Claudia, asking her to investigate which artifacts could alter body density but weren't currently in the warehouse. After some digging, Claudia discovered Jack Kirby's belt. Jack Kirby was behind some of the most iconic comic book characters, including Captain America, Hulk, Iron Man, and the Fantastic Four. In Sheldon's room, Pete and Micah found a photo of him with the restaurant owner. It was clear he cared deeply for her. Sure enough, Sheldon went to the restaurant to see the owner drenched in sweat, clearly under significant physical strain. Slamming a mask onto the table, he declared he is Underpants Superman, and everything he had done was for her. Just as he finished speaking, Pete and Micah arrived. Without hesitation, Sheldon unleashed his powers, nearly hurting the restaurant owner in the process. Realizing he could no longer fully control his strength, he flew off again, crashing through the ceiling and leaving a gaping hole behind. Suddenly, Claudia burst through the door. She had brought specialized tools to counter Underpants Superman, including military-grade armor and a Thanos-style glove. Claudia explained that she designed the glove herself. This combination allowed the wearer to redirect energy, no matter how powerful the opponent. Essentially, it grew stronger against stronger foes. Pete, excited by the prospect of being a superhero, started stripping to put on the gear. Claudia added that the suit depletes bodily fluids and will leave him completely exhausted after 5 minutes. Pete shrugged it off, saying, "That's fine. He only needs a minute to take him down." Claudia smirked and added that for men, that gear might cause erectile dysfunction. Pete froze and quickly decided against it. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Arty reflected on the similarities between himself and James. Both had been through metaphorical rebirths, and perhaps that connection held the key to the mystery. Just then, Lena experienced another bout of dizziness. Using her detection equipment, Claudia pinpointed an area of intense energy. The restaurant owner immediately recognized it as a location Sheldon often visited, an abandoned factory where he used to ponder life as a former automotive engineer. The team rushed to the factory and found Sheldon wandering around. He admitted that he can't control this energy anymore, his power on the verge of exploding. Pete and Claudia quickly took cover and prepared their countermeasures. Micah, dressed as a superhero, told Sheldon to grab her, intending to redirect his energy outward. Meanwhile, Pete seized the opportunity to remove the belt from Sheldon's waist. As soon as he unbuckled the belt, Micah directed the energy skyward. The restaurant owner arrived just in time. Sheldon, now calm, looked confused since this has nothing to do with the belt. It's these sexy underpants. Only then did everyone realize the artifact wasn't the belt, but the underpants. However, by now the energy density had grown so immense that a black hole was about to form. If they didn't stop it, the entire world could be destroyed. With no other choice, Micah risked her life, allowing the gravitational pull to drag her toward Sheldon. Using her energy-draining ability, she absorbed some of the force. Pete, sliding in with surprising agility, yanked off Sheldon's underpants with practiced ease. Claudia quickly sealed the underpants in an isolation bag, bringing the crisis to an end. Sheldon then explained how he acquired the underpants. He was out for a walk one day and stopped at a street vendor selling junk. He bought a bunch of random stuff, including these athletic shorts, but never thought that these street vendor knockoff shorts could wield such power. The absurdity of the story left everyone speechless. After seeing Sheldon and the restaurant owner's sweet affection for each other, Pete decided against arresting him. When Claudia questioned this, Micah explained Sheldon wasn't acting on his own. It was the artifact that controlled him. He almost hurt the person he loves the most. Claudia seemed deeply moved by this. Back at the warehouse, Arty entered a room by typing passwords into a keypad. The room, a reconstruction of James's old living space, contained a photo of the two of them together on a corner of the desk. Arty picked up a phoenix badge and murmured that no one expected their shared brush with death would bind them together like this. As he spoke, James's spirit appeared behind him. Arty set the badge down and opened a drawer, discovering a letter and a pocket watch. In the letter, James told Arty they both argued about the watch so much, and now it belongs to him. As Arty finished reading, James's spirit faded away, never to return again. Claudia found Lena and apologized, and the two made up but not made out. However, shortly after Claudia left, Lena experienced another dizzy spell. She quickly picked up the phone and called Irene. The camera shifted, revealing one of the artifacts on a shelf was Thor's hammer. After securing the athletic shorts in the warehouse, Micah and Pete returned to the villa. The group gifted Sheldon a massive flat-screen TV, while Micah went the extra mile and gave him issue 46 of the Masked Iron Man comic book. The scene shifts to the Wichita Army Experimental Base in 1944, where a project known as Gemini was underway. Suddenly, a car sped onto the base, and the driver flashed his muscles and Secret Service badge, identifying himself as an agent from Warehouse 13. He demanded to speak with the general and insisted on halting Farnsworth's demonstration immediately. Just then, an explosion shook the base, and the scene transitioned to the present day. Irene stared at the blueprints of the Farnsworth device on the table, lost in thought. Lena walked in, explaining that Claudia planned to dismantle the Farnsworth for a thorough study. Realizing she had said too much, Lena quickly added that it's still office equipment and they can't just take it apart willy-nilly. Irene's visit this time was prompted by Lena's dizzy spells. Two members of the warehouse board also showed up, underscoring the seriousness of her condition. Irene explained Lena's dizziness might be caused by something James left behind, like an echo or residue. Today, they are going to get to the bottom of this. The camera cut to Pete and Micah at the post office, where they found the manager locking up. The manager told them no shipments today and they should go find another post office. She said she quitted the job here since the pay here sucks. Back at the warehouse, Claudia had completely disassembled the Farnsworth device. Her plan was to add a ringtone, GPS functionality, and a texting feature. Arty scolded her and ordered her to put it back together. Pete's Farnsworth suddenly emitted a strange screech, but he brushed it off, assuming it was just a bad signal. Nearby, however, a pet store clerk noticed a flash of electricity, and moments later, 3 U.S. soldiers armed with rifles marched past. She wondered what was going on and if they were filming a movie. Arty detected the anomaly and decided to join Pete and Micah in the town. The town appeared to be close to the warehouse. Arty handed each of them a fake tax agency badge and tasked them with conducting house-to-house investigations. At Lena's villa, the team worked on uncovering what James might have left in her mind. To do this, they had to use the sphere of wisdom again, inserting it into her ear. However, since removing the sphere from a host could be life-threatening, Irene was strongly opposed to risking Lena's life. But Lena was determined, saying she needed to find out what's causing her dizziness. In town, Pete and Micah interviewed Kelly, a pet store clerk, who mentioned seeing Marines. She described them as strangers to the town, with armbands featuring what looked like a wolf's head emblem. As she continued, her tone shifted, and she began angrily ranting about taxes. If not for her good looks, Pete might have lost his temper and confronted her. Fortunately, Micah managed to calm his muscles down. Elsewhere, Claudia stopped by a hardware store, picking up a large haul of electronic components while investigating. She tried entering a room in the back, but was stopped by Todd, the clerk. Suddenly, her Farnsworth let out another ghostly screech. Stepping outside to check, she found nothing unusual, but someone on horseback galloped past at high speed, nearly knocking her over. Pete and Micah continued visiting several more locations, only to be met with hostility. Pete wondered why it had to be the tax office of all the agencies to impersonate, realizing how unpopular the government was in this town. Just then, Pete's Farnsworth emitted another burst of static, and a group of men dressed as Wild West cowboys appeared in the middle of the street. It looked like a gunfight was about to break out. Pete squinted at one of the younger cowboys, believing that guy looked so familiar. Before he could figure it out, the shootout began, and as quickly as it started, the cowboys vanished into thin air. The group gathered for a quick meeting. Arty pointed out that at 10 a.m., while Claudia was tampering with the Farnsworth, the store clerk Kelly saw the Marines. Since then, every time the Farnsworth emits a sound, some strange phenomenon occurs. He asked Claudia if this was her doing, but she insisted that she had already fixed the Farnsworth and that it had nothing to do with her. At Lena's villa, Irene handed her an amber-like sphere, explaining that it could stabilize the sphere of wisdom. She then reinserted the sphere of wisdom into Lena's ear, and the amber sphere began to project various images of James. Meanwhile, Claudia mentioned her suspicions about Todd, the hardware store clerk. She recounted how he had stopped her from investigating a certain room. Pete and Micah decided to have Claudia keep an eye on Todd while they snuck into the room. At the hardware store, Todd noticed a blue glow nearby. When he approached, he was startled to see a massive tiger alongside a gladiator. Terrified, Todd bolted for the door but was knocked out cold by an elbow from Claudia. Inside the room, Pete and Micah uncovered some shady activity, but it turned out to be nothing more than Todd's boss making bootleg DVDs. When the group came back outside, they found the enormous tiger lying dead on the ground, seemingly killed by the gladiator. Pete recognized the gladiator as the same man who had appeared earlier as the cowboy. The gladiator delivered a few scripted lines before suddenly attacking. In the nick of time, Micah stunned him with a Tesla gun, causing him to vanish. Back at the villa, Lena suddenly mimicked James's voice, manipulating Irene to tell her secret. Irene's expression turned contemplative upon hearing this. Meanwhile, Pete and Micah speculated that every anomaly seemed to be preceded by the Farnsworth emitting a signal. They theorized that the Farnsworth might be capable of detecting these signals and asked Claudia to find a way to use it for reverse tracking to locate the artifact. Claudia immediately returned to the warehouse and got to work building a reverse tracker. Within no time, she had it ready. Before heading back, she mentioned that Artifact 186 was peculiar. The records showed that it was damaged in 1944, with 2 parts shipped to the warehouse, but only part 186B was on the shelf. The whereabouts of 186A were unknown. Alarmed, Arty rushed to investigate the warehouse. Meanwhile, Pete and Micah visited Kelly again, asking for more details about the Marines she had seen. Kelly described the armbands they wore, featuring a flaming wolf emblem. Pete was puzzled, wondering why Marines would have a wolf emblem. Then he exclaimed, "It's from a movie! The team in the film all wore those armbands, and Raymond starred in it. He looks exactly like that cowboy and the gladiator, suggesting that these anomalies might be reenacting movie scenes." Back at the warehouse, Arty uncovered the truth about Artifact 186. It was equipment from the Gemini Project mentioned earlier, a 3D camera and a 3D projector capable of creating highly realistic holographic images. The Gemini Project was initially designed for the military to showcase new weapons, but the effects were so convincing that the projector accidentally caused real-world destruction. This was likely the cause of the explosion at the experimental base. Arty pried open the crate for Artifact 186 186, only to find the 3D camera. The projector was missing, likely held up at the town's post office where it had been sent decades ago. At the same time, Claudia used her homemade tracker to follow the signals to Kelly's pet store. There, in the hallway, another movie scene played out starring Raymond again. Pete, having watched the film countless times, even recited the lines by heart. After the scene ended, Pete realized that the anomalies were following the order of Raymond's films. The only one left was Dr. Doomsday. Pete tried to reassure everyone, saying Dr. Doomsday is a comedy, and Raymond plays a mad scientist who blows up the whole town in the end. Micah raised an eyebrow. Shortly afterward, Arty arrived, bringing the 3D camera along. He explained the connection between Artifact 186 and the Gemini Project. Although the exact mechanism wasn't clear, it was highly likely that the missing projector was responsible for the anomalies. Arty warned the group that if they didn't locate the projector soon, the entire town could face annihilation. The group first headed to the post office where the missing package, 186A, had been lost. Sure enough, they found the empty package. The label had been damaged, making the address illegible, and it had ended up in the dead mail pile, sitting there for over 60 years. Recently, someone had opened it. Pete froze for a moment. There was only one suspect, the post office manager. She had just announced she was quitting and planned to spend her days eating popcorn and watching movies. The scene cut to the manager, reclining with her head tilted, engrossed in a movie. On the screen was Dr. Doomsday. She paused the movie and got up to microwave some popcorn. At that moment, the group arrived at her home. Back at Lena's villa, Irene transferred all of James's memories into the amber sphere, finally waking Lena. However, Irene seemed distracted, likely still pondering James's cryptic words. At the manager's house, she continued microwaving her popcorn while the others inspected the projector. The projector was hooked up to the TV signal cable, essentially functioning as a way for her to project movies onto a larger screen. Claudia was stunned, since there's no power source. Arty explained that the projector had an internal power source similar to the Farnsworth. That's why the Farnsworth kept reacting whenever the projector was active. Arty unplugged the signal cable, and just as the popcorn finished, the Farnsworth started screeching again. Arty and Claudia suddenly realized what was happening. The interference waves had been diffracted into the signal. Even though the cable was unplugged, the projector was still running because it had already buffered the previous signal. It was like streaming a movie on a phone. Even if the Wi-Fi cuts out, the buffered portion continues playing for a while. Using the Farnsworth, the group tracked the signal to its source. On the projector screen, Dr. Doomsday was making his final speech about a machine that would destroy the world. Pete recalled that they only got about 3 minutes left. Suddenly, an ad break interrupted the movie, buying them a little time. Meanwhile, Claudia and Arty rushed to bring the 3D camera to overwrite the movie's projection with something new. Just as they drove off, Todd appeared, chasing after them with a box in hand. At the scene, Pete and Micah tried using the Tesla gun against Dr. Doomsday, but his robot sidekick absorbed the shot. Moments later, Claudia and Arty arrived with the camera, but it was damaged during the 1944 explosion. Fortunately, Todd arrived with the box, which contained the electronic parts Claudia had previously planned to buy. Overjoyed, Claudia gave Todd a quick kiss before getting to work. She always got overly affectionate when excited. Just as Dr. Doomsday was about to press the Doomsday button, Claudia managed to repair the 3D camera. A giant face suddenly appeared out of nowhere, startling everyone, but the immediate crisis was averted. Afterward, Claudia eagerly began tinkering with the Tesla gun again. Pete rolled his eyes, saying she was planning to break everything she touched. Later, Pete popped a big bowl of popcorn and invited everyone to his room to watch a movie together. The group happily accepted. After they left, Irene appeared again. He tore a sketch off Lena's desk. It looked like a drawing of headphones. Could it mean that Lena hadn't fully recovered yet? Meanwhile, in Milan, a grand fashion show was underway. Suddenly, an elderly woman tottered onto the stage, grabbing at one of the models while muttering something incoherent. Security stepped in to stop her, but the woman collapsed and died on the spot. Pete and Micah were immediately dispatched to Milan. A police officer briefed them, saying the woman's identity was unknown and her death was due to natural causes. However, they found something peculiar in her chest: 2 silicone implants. Pete remarked that it's odd for an elderly woman to have breast implants. What was even stranger was the woman's final words, shouted in Russian before she died. The officer repeated the phrase, and Micah, who understood Russian, said it meant they stole it from her. Pete searched the implant's serial numbers online and discovered that they belonged to a 19-year-old Russian model who had come to Milan for the fashion show. The police confirmed that the Russian model had been reported missing 2 days earlier. Given the bizarre nature of the events they'd dealt with before, Pete and Micah quickly reached two possible conclusions. Either someone had stolen the implants and placed them in the elderly woman's body, or more disturbingly, the elderly woman was the 19-year-old model. Back at the warehouse, the team uncovered more information. Recently, several models had gone missing in different cities across the globe. Shortly after each disappearance, an elderly woman would turn up dead in the same city, almost always from natural causes. A key discovery emerged when they learned that one of the missing models, an Asian woman, had a dragon tattoo. A few days later, an elderly woman who passed away was found to have the same tattoo in the exact same spot. Micah speculated that there might be an artifact causing rapid aging. But why was it happening only within the fashion industry, and only to women? That was the mystery the team had to solve. Coincidentally, New York Fashion Week was underway, and the Russian model's agent was in town. Arty sent Pete and Micah to investigate, and they wasted no time heading over. Pete was ecstatic, joking that he picked the wrong career. Being the model's agent sounds way better than being an agent of the warehouse, before attempting to chat up a model in a red dress. The red-dressed model brushed him off, saying she was not feeling well, and with the pandemic raging, he should really keep his distance. With that, she walked away with her sexy body. The pair eventually found the Russian model's agent, who had no idea where the model had gone or why she disappeared. The only thing the agent remembered was that the model had seemed unwell before vanishing. Pete suddenly recalled that the model in the red dress had also mentioned feeling sick. A hunch struck him. What if the model disappearances were connected to some sort of illness? He hurried to stop the red-dressed model. Before they could exchange many words, her body began to glow faintly, and she collapsed. By the time Micah arrived, the model had transformed into an elderly woman. Pete quickly called Arty to report the situation. Arty instructed them to send a sample of the model's blood back to the warehouse for analysis. Meanwhile, Pete suggested that Micah go undercover as a model to get closer to the others. Soon enough, Micah, dolled up and dazzling, was strutting through Fashion Week once again. Pete posed as her agent, but as soon as they entered backstage, a designer took one look at Micah and showed no respect. Only out of respect for the Russian model's agent did the designer reluctantly agree to let Micah shoot a test photo shoot. During the shoot, however, the designer gradually warmed to Micah, much to the annoyance of another top model, Flora, the reigning queen of the runway. Flora stormed over, glaring at Micah and asking if Micah was trying to steal her spotlight. The designer reassured Flora that she was still the brightest star in the sky. Meanwhile, the blood sample from the red-dressed model arrived at the warehouse. Unfortunately, Arty had a fear of blood, so he handed it off to Claudia for analysis. As Claudia was loading the sample into the mass spectrometer, her phone rang, startling her. It was Todd, the hardware store clerk from a previous mission, asking her out to dinner. Overhearing the call, Arty told her to go since it is more important. He took the sample, letting her rush off. The scene shifted back to Micah, who was admiring her test photos. Just then, someone tapped her shoulder. On instinct, she swung around, almost knocking him out. It turned out to be a journalist who called her a natural beauty. Pete arrived shortly after, having done some digging. He discovered that all the previously missing models, including the red-dressed one, had been rivals of Flora. Pete speculated Flora might be eliminating her competition. He asked Micah to distract Flora while he sneaked into her dressing room to search for any artifacts. Elsewhere, Claudia and Todd were having dinner, but the date wasn't going well. Their personalities clashed. Claudia found Todd's lack of interest in technology frustrating. After some awkward conversation, Claudia began to feel out of place, like a misfit. Flustered, she accidentally spilled her food on Todd and fled the scene. Back at Fashion Week, Micah managed to find Flora, but she couldn't help but think if this was really the top model everyone's raving about because she's so ordinary. Flora boasted shamelessly, saying she can stop a war or start one with just a glance on the runway. Meanwhile, in Flora's dressing room, Pete was rifling through her belongings. Suddenly, someone entered and placed a Buddha statue on the table before leaving. Pete examined it, thinking this might be the artifact. Micah was still keeping Flora busy when she noticed a bouquet of flowers being delivered to Flora. At the same time, Pete intercepted the woman who had delivered the statue. She revealed that the Buddha statue wasn't an artifact, but a stash for contraband diet pills, illegal weight loss drugs Flora had been using. The delivery woman offered Micah a sample, claiming it could help her lose 5 pounds. Micah coolly told her to get lost. The scene shifted again, showing an elderly woman wearing large ruby earrings meeting with a mysterious figure. The figure handed her a photograph of Micah. The woman studied it and said, "She's the one," suggesting that Micah might be the next victim. When Claudia returned to the warehouse, Arty excitedly announced that he had found silver nitrate in the blood sample. However, Claudia started berating him, clearly frustrated. Realizing her mood, Arty clammed up, deciding it was better not to say anything else. Meanwhile, Micah was about to take the stage for the fashion show when Pete approached her, telling her she should not do it since he got a bad feeling about this. Micah paused, then took off her shoes. Pete, however, gave her a heartfelt pep talk, saying that dangerous situations aren't exactly new to them. Convinced, Micah finally stepped onto the runway. During the show, Micah noticed an elderly woman in the audience wearing ruby earrings, staring at her intently. When the show ended, she told Pete about the woman and they hurried to her seat, only to find she was already gone. At the same time, the elderly woman transferred $10 million to a mysterious figure. After the transaction, the figure placed photos of both Micah and the elderly woman into a chemical bath. Moments later, their appearances swapped. Micah began to heat up and collapsed into Pete's arms, rapidly aging into an elderly woman. Simultaneously, the elderly woman, now looking exactly like Micah, regained her youth. Arty and Claudia rushed to the hospital to see Micah. Arty analyzed Micah's blood and found traces of silver nitrate. Pete immediately connected the dots, saying, "This must have something to do with photo development since silver nitrate is widely used in photographic film." Arty suddenly remembered a warehouse artifact, Man Ray's camera. Man Ray, a provocative photographer from the 20th century, was known for his daring avant-garde work. Although he had passed away, the camera he created had been a sought-after artifact. A former warehouse agent had spent years searching for it, but never found it. Claudia hacked into the fashion show's surveillance system and found footage of a man carrying an antique camera who had snapped just one photo before leaving. It was the same journalist who had earlier encouraged Micah. Wasting no time, they tracked him down to his apartment, where they found Man Ray's camera and discovered photos of both Micah and the elderly woman on the wall. Enraged, Pete lunged at the journalist, demanding to know how the camera worked. It was clear that Micah now held a special place in Pete's heart. Left with no choice, the journalist explained. It turns out by immersing film of an elderly person and a young person together in a chemical developer, their appearances can be swapped. But it doesn't work for just anyone. You have to bare your soul to the camera for it to capture the essence of your being. That's why models are the perfect candidates. Suddenly, the journalist hurled a lighter into the developing solution, causing an explosion before fleeing the scene. Back at the hospital, Claudia hacked into the journalist's bank records and discovered he had been ordering flowers repeatedly over the past week. Micah immediately realized he's been sending them to Flora. He's infatuated with her. Pete rushed off to confront Flora. Meanwhile, Arty had a breakthrough. The journalist had mentioned that the camera belonged to Manny, which was Man Ray's nickname, something only a few people would know. The scene shifted to the journalist meeting Flora. He pleaded with her to be together since he's pretty rich right now. Flora rejected him outright, shoving his smelly butt away. At that moment, Pete burst in and started fighting the journalist. Despite his best efforts, Pete couldn't overpower him. The journalist grabbed a Tesla gun and prepared to shoot. Suddenly, Arty stormed in, pointing the camera at the journalist and snapping a picture. It turned out that the journalist was once Man Ray's muse, his trusted model since the age of 22. After Man Ray's death, he inherited the camera and discovered its ability to restore youth. But why hadn't he used it on himself first? Arty revealed the truth. Though the journalist looked young, he was actually 98 years old. He had been the first person to use the camera's power. Arty opened the camera's film canister, exposing the film to light. When film that has been double exposed is overexposed, everything reverts to its original state. The journalist instantly aged into an old man, revealing his true self. Using the same method, Micah was restored to her original form. With the situation resolved, Arty invited Claudia for tea. While they were chatting and laughing, Todd showed up unexpectedly, confessing his feelings to Claudia. The next moment, the two were cuddling, seemingly inseparable. It looked like Claudia and Todd were officially a couple. But then, Claudia glanced at her watch and sprang to her feet. She said she had to go. Today's the day she installed the new warehouse system. She said to Todd she would see him at lunch before rushing off, leaving him a little annoyed. In the warehouse, everyone watched as a computer genius upgraded the system. Arty reminded him to be careful, as the system was no trivial matter. This engineer, who lived in Eureka, presumably worked at Global Dynamics. His name was Fargo. Fargo told Arty not to doubt his expertise. This sparked an argument, and Pete stepped in to mediate. Since Claudia sent Fargo here, it meant he was capable. Fargo continued the upgrade. At one point, he accidentally dropped the welding torch into a pit. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't retrieve it. Claudia then appeared, wearing a ring on her finger. The ring allowed her entire arm to glow, and she easily retrieved the welding torch. Fargo was amazed and asked about the glowing mechanism. Was it some kind of phosphorescent material? Claudia was stunned, saying this ring was invented by Benjamin Franklin to enhance human energy and emit light. Fargo, realizing Warehouse 13 was no ordinary place, asked for permission to tour the facility after completing the installation. Claudia flatly denied the request, citing Fargo's insufficient clearance level. Fargo brought out a few gadgets of his own creation, including an elliptical device he called an automatic repair machine, essentially a self-repairing robot. After fixing the circuits, Fargo hit the update button, but the system failed to start. Instead, numerous red-lit rods emerged from the ground. A voice announced that a catastrophic failure had been detected, possibly triggering an automatic anti-failure mechanism. Fargo complained to Arty, asking why he hadn't mentioned the anti-failure system. Arty was just as confused, as he wasn't aware of it either. Claudia investigated and discovered that the anti-failure system wasn't activated locally. Suddenly, the red-lit rods began to speak, startling everyone. Arty recognized the voice as Hugo, the designer of Warehouse 13's systems. Arty led the group to the computer room, which had been abandoned for 35 years. The last person to use it was Hugo. Thanks to Hugo, Warehouse 13 was now a fully operational platform. Hugo was not only a computer whiz, but also a fan of board games and pranks. In the room, they found the CPU for the anti-failure system. Claudia discovered that Hugo's system was uploading warehouse data. If it reached 100%, the warehouse would fall under the control of the anti-failure system. Micah suggested summoning Hugo since he had invented the system. Hugo wasn't dead, but had retired. He now lived 2 hours away by car. Pete and Micah drove to find him at Hutchinson Care Home, where he was enjoying his retirement. With the director's help, they met Hugo, who was now an elderly man, seemingly absent-minded, drawing circles repeatedly while mumbling to himself. Regardless, Pete tricked Hugo into agreeing to leave by promising him ice cream. However, Hugo took Pete's Tesla gun, knocked out both agents, and gleefully skipped out of the care home. Back at the warehouse, the team reviewed Hugo's records, only to find them heavily redacted. They also learned that Hugo once fainted in aisle 22. By this point, Hugo's system had completed uploading all data, and a hologram of Hugo himself appeared before the group. Calling himself Hugo 1, the hologram could interact with them like a true AI. Arty explained that no catastrophic events had occurred. They were merely upgrading the system. He told Hugo 1 to return where he came from, but Hugo refused, stating he now controlled the entire warehouse. For safety's sake, he needed to review the past 30 years of artifacts and agent files. With that, Hugo left, behaving entirely autonomously. Elsewhere, Pete and Micah found Hugo near a carousel. Fargo, still at the warehouse, marveled at Hugo's intellect, wondering how he invented AI more than 30 years ago. Arty dismissed it, saying it wasn't that impressive. It was easy to achieve using the capabilities of the artifacts. Soon, Hugo 1 returned, reprimanding Claudia for almost destroying the warehouse 9 times, and mocking Fargo for pressing the wrong button 38 times. It seemed Hugo 1 could monitor external events through the warehouse systems. Hugo 1 identified the cause of the anti-failure system's activation: 2 idiots in the warehouse. He was referring to Pete and Micah, and as a result, he locked the main entrance to keep them out. By noon, Todd had waited a long time for Claudia. With no other choice, he called her, but since Claudia couldn't leave the warehouse, she had to delay their meeting until the evening. Meanwhile, for some inexplicable reason, Fargo started muttering next to her. Todd overheard and asked who she was with. Before Claudia could respond, Hugo 1 interrupted the signal, stating that the warehouse prohibited external communication. He then activated the Falcon-Scott protocol, a system designed to lower the warehouse's temperature below freezing to safeguard the artifacts. At the same time, Pete and Micah were escorting Hugo to the warehouse. Micah obtained some information indicating that part of Hugo's brain had ceased functioning. Arty, still in the warehouse, retrieved some magic stones and handed one each to Claudia and Fargo. With the magic stones, they could speak a mysterious language that only those holding the stones could understand. Hugo 1, now confused and unable to comprehend their speech, assumed the language system was malfunctioning. He activated Fargo's repair robot, displaying an impressive ability to control other people's devices. Meanwhile, Hugo insisted on getting getting ice cream. Pete reluctantly took him to a shop, while Micah informed Arty of the situation. Since Micah couldn't understand Hugo's cryptic remark about a flower pot in the shop, Arty wrote a note instructing them to bring Hugo back as soon as possible. Unfortunately, Hugo 1 intercepted the note, issued a warrant for Pete and Micah, and broadcasted it everywhere. When the shopkeeper saw the warrant, he turned a flamethrower on the pair. Back at the warehouse, Claudia searched for artifacts while Fargo pried to ask if Todd was her boyfriend. Claudia shared her story with Todd, only to accidentally knock over a zoetrope. Fargo picked it up and spun it out of curiosity. Claudia tried to stop him, but accidentally glimpsed Fargo's entire life. Thankfully, Claudia intervened just in time. Otherwise, Fargo's soul would have been lost. Fargo inspected the zoetrope's label, Wertheimer's zoetrope, capable of consciousness transfer. Wertheimer, a pioneer in 1920s psychology, had been a leading researcher in cognitive processes. Claudia suddenly realized Micah's earlier mention of Hugo's carousel might actually refer to this zoetrope. Just then, several repair robots appeared, attacking them mindlessly. The scene shifted back to the shop, where Micah flashed her badge at the shopkeeper, only to be told it was fake. Pete signaled to Hugo, who casually tossed a soda grenade. Micah used the distraction to knock the shopkeeper unconscious, allowing the trio to move forward. Elsewhere, Arty reached the computer room and confronted Hugo 1 with a handful of board games. Hugo 1 scoffed, refusing to let games distract him. Nevertheless, they began a dogfighting game. In the meantime, Fargo grabbed a welding torch and demanded Claudia hand over her energy-boosting ring. Claudia complied, placing the ring on the torch, which transformed it into a laser sword. Excited, they used it to destroy a repair robot. Overcome with emotion, they kissed passionately. As mentioned earlier, Claudia tended to tongue massage impulsively. She pulled back, saying she did like him, but when she kissed him, she couldn't stop thinking about Todd. Fargo replied, he was just a guest star. It's no big deal for him. Soon, Pete and Micah arrived with Hugo at the warehouse entrance, but they couldn't get in. Inside, Hugo 1 and Arty were in the middle of an intense battle. Hugo 1 had destroyed all of Arty's maps, but hadn't managed to hit a single plane, leaving him bewildered. Arty taunted that he simply didn't deploy any planes. Furious, Hugo 1 prepared to punish Arty, but Arty calmly countered that he's not an artificial intelligence. He's just a part of Hugo, and true AI is far more intelligent than him. Arty revealed that Hugo 1 had an orange fat cat and cheated at every game. Now, the game-loving part of Hugo is here, but the cheating part isn't. Cornered, Hugo 1 confessed. He had been researching artificial intelligence, but the government deemed it too dangerous and shut it down. Determined, Hugo decided to merge humans with computers to create true AI. The cheating side of Hugo took a shortcut, using an artifact to transfer his consciousness into a computer. It was likely the zoetrope, but the process failed, leaving only part of his consciousness in the computer. This explained the missing portion of Hugo's brain. Arty was on the verge of a breakdown, saying he couldn't even manage a warehouse with half a brain. He turned to the agents, telling them to bring the real Hugo in and merge his brain back together. Hugo agreed, but with one condition. Once his brain was merged, he would no longer exist in human form. Instead, he wanted to create a fully autonomous artificial intelligence, which would result in his physical body's death, while his consciousness would live forever in a computer. Arty reluctantly agreed. Hugo 1 opened the gates, and everyone gathered together. Upon hearing this plan, Pete objected, saying they couldn't kill this big lug. But before Pete could finish, Hugo 1 deployed a maintenance robot to silence him. The robot, wielding a chainsaw, was ready to cut Pete down, leaving everyone with no choice but to comply with Hugo 1. They connected the zoetrope to the computer and played it for Hugo to watch. As the lights dimmed, Arty whispered that now is their chance. The merging process will use up a lot of CPU power. He suggested they hack the automatic failsafe system while they can. Claudia immediately got to work but realized the system was password protected. Micah handed them a piece of paper that Hugo had drawn on earlier, hoping for a clue. The drawing depicted a cat. Micah deduced that the password must be the name of the cat Hugo once owned. Pete then shouted the cat's name. Claudia typed it in, and it worked. In just 7 seconds, they regained control of the warehouse's system. Arty reversed the zoetrope's direction, pulling Hugo's consciousness out of the computer and back into his body. Everything returned to normal. Hugo blinked in confusion, asking what they were all doing in his office. Pete grinned and offered him some ice cream. Hugo replied that he had diabetes. After setting the zoetrope aside, Micah turned to Pete, asking him if he ever thought about the future. Nearly every agent in this warehouse has either died, gone insane, or vanished. If he is sure he wants to keep doing this. Pete told her not to overthink it. As long as he's by her side, he's only ever one step away. If she dies, he'll die too. Worst case, they go down together. With the warehouse system upgraded, Fargo invited Hugo to visit Eureka Town. Hugo remembered James and asked about when the three of them could play games together again. Hearing this, Arty couldn't help but feel nostalgic and emotional, his tears welling up before he could speak. At Lena's villa, Todd approached Claudia and suggested they should break up. Pete and Micah were on a secret mission at a museum in Illinois. Arty had detected some supernatural activity tied to an artifact and sent the pair to investigate. They sneaked in under the cover of night, ensuring no one noticed them. In one glass display case, there was supposed to be an artifact known as the elephant walking stick, a relic of a general that was rumored to cause earthquakes and was once invincible on the battlefield. However, the case was empty. Assuming it had been moved for another exhibition, they didn't pay much attention. The museum was filled with ancient objects, and Pete couldn't resist the urge to touch everything. Suddenly, a staff member entered the room, holding none other than the elephant walking stick. When he noticed Pete and Micah, he struck the floor with the cane, causing a small earthquake. It seemed the staff member hadn't intended to steal it, he just wanted to test its power. However, the commotion triggered the alarm, and security quickly mobilized. The three of them ran out in different directions. Pete failed to catch the staff member but ran into Irene, who handed him a secret mission, saying, "This is an ultimate classified task, and he can't tell anyone." Pete agreed without hesitation. Irene then told him to abandon the chase and let the elephant walking stick be stolen. Pete asked why, bewildered. Irene replied, "It's an order and he just needs to follow it." Then she disappeared. When Micah regrouped with Pete, he simply said the thief was too agile. He couldn't catch him. Moments later, security guards arrived and arrested both of them. The next day, a female agent came to bail them out. Her name was Kate, an agent from the Chicago field office, and Pete's ex-girlfriend. Although they had broken up, they were still on good terms. Just then, Arty called, summoning them back to the warehouse immediately since a supervising board member is here. The member named Valda had come to criticize Pete and Micah for losing yet another artifact and letting the thief escape. Valda exclaimed, "It's unacceptable, and from now on, he would personally oversee all warehouse operations." Claudia muttered her disbelief, but Arty warned her it's unwise to talk back to the leadership. Before leaving, Valda handed Arty a USB drive. Micah confronted Pete that it's all his fault. He could have caught the thief, but he let him get away. She finished speaking, keyed in a password, and stormed off. Pete was left speechless. After Micah left, Pete met up with Irene again. Irene told him there's a mole in the warehouse and he needs to find them. She told him not to worry about Valda, he's just putting on a show. Irene handed Pete 3 personnel files of Micah, Arty, and Claudia. Pete was stunned, saying they're his teammates and how could any of them be traitors? Irene told him to find the mole. If he needs to contact her, break the second-to-last row of glass. Meanwhile, Claudia hacked into the warehouse's system to check the contents of the USB drive Valda had left. It turned out to be a list of mistakes made by the agents over time. In Illinois, Pete and Micah continued their search for the thief, though Pete had a bigger goal in mind, uncovering the mole. At the thief's hideout, the lights wouldn't turn on. Micah kept flipping the switch repeatedly. Glancing down, Pete spotted the thief but said nothing to Micah. Instead, he quietly followed the thief on his own, only to witness him engaged in a shady deal with Valda. Micah called out for Pete, and Valda fled upon hearing her. Pete knocked the thief unconscious with a single shot and called Micah over, but by the time she arrived, the thief had disappeared again. Pete later reported the situation to Irene, saying the mole is definitely Valda. He asked if he could at least tell Micah or Arty about this. Irene said no, because Valda has the authority to eliminate anyone they see as a threat to the warehouse. If he tells anyone now, he'll only put them in danger. Back at the villa, Pete used the thief's phone to redial the last number called. The person on the other end mentioned a motel, then abruptly hung up. When Micah asked what he'd found, Pete lied, saying he hadn't uncovered anything. But Micah was growing increasingly suspicious of Pete's strange behavior. She remembered how, earlier at the thief's hideout, Pete had glanced out the window and left abruptly. Coupled with his odd actions recently, Micah began to wonder if Pete's drinking problem is back. In the first case they ever worked on together, Pete had a severe alcohol addiction addiction but had supposedly quit since then. At the warehouse, Claudia's search uncovered a disturbing document, a sheet detailing various ways to kill her. These were methods Valda used to neutralize agents. Arty shrugged it off, telling her not to take it personally. They've all got one of these. Just then, Micah entered the room, and the team began interrogating Pete. Micah demanded to know if he had started drinking again. Pete was frustrated but couldn't reveal the truth, fumbling for a response that didn't make things better. In desperation, Pete smashed the second-to-last row of glass as Irene had instructed. Moments later, Pete received a call from Valda. The voice on the other end told him to check the tree outside. Pete went to investigate and found a set of photos showing him secretly meeting with Irene. Valda's voice continued, saying, "Irene is in his hands. If he wants her to live, he has to help him capture the thief. If not, he'll wipe out everyone in the warehouse." Furious, Pete cursed under his breath. Pete decided not to wait for Valda to act. He packed his gear, left a warning note on the door. Then he disappeared without a trace. Micah found the note, showed it to Arty and Claudia, and the three were baffled, wondering what's going on. Pete headed to the motel, where he successfully captured the thief. It was the secret meeting place he'd overheard on the phone. Pete questioned the thief about Valda's location, but the thief was clueless. Pete retrieved the elephant walking stick hidden under the bed and left. Later, he sat outside a coffee shop, waiting for someone. A child nearby was tapping a stick against a railing, the noise grating on Pete's nerves. After a while, Kate, Pete's ex-girlfriend, arrived. It seemed she was the person Pete had called to meet. Kate bombarded him with questions. She told him since they last parted, she had felt like her phone's been tapped and someone's been following her. Pete mentioned Valda, who was behind all of it. Noticing a waiter approaching, Pete immediately fell silent. The waiter set down their coffee, giving Pete a strange look as though he were crazy. Pete asked Kate to help him track down Valda. Their conversation must have gone well because the two ended up in bed together soon after. Suddenly, Micah burst into the room, catching Pete and Kate in bed. Kate left in embarrassment, and when faced with Micah's interrogation, Pete had no choice but to confess that Valda was the enemy. Micah demanded Pete to come back with her, but Pete pulled out the cane, knocked Micah onto the bed, and bolted. Downstairs, Kate waited loyally in her car to pick Pete up. Before getting in, Pete said he's doing this to protect them all. Micah warned Pete not to get in the car, but then he noticed a communication device in her ear. Looking up, he spotted a sniper, and before he could act, Kate was shot dead. Realizing there was no turning back now, Pete ran off again. The scene shifted to Micah arriving at the police station to meet Kate. It turned out Pete was caught in a deep hallucination. Everything, Irene seeking him out, seeing Valda trading with the thief, meeting Kate, sleeping with her, was largely fabricated by Pete's imagination. Micah had overheard Pete calling out Kate's name and suspected she was part of his delusion. To confirm, she found the real Kate and showed her surveillance footage of Pete at the coffee shop. She demanded to know if Pete was fantasizing about Kate, but Kate denied her accusation. Kate had indeed received a message from Pete asking her to find Valda, but she hadn't responded. Micah shared everything with Arty, who speculated that Pete's condition might have been caused by something he interacted with at the museum. Many of the artifacts there were ancient, and some might have had mysterious effects. Micah returned to the museum and showed Arty everything Pete had touched. Arty was exasperated, saying Pete practically touched every artifact. One artifact caught Arty's attention, a military telegraph machine from the 1860s, originating from Oman Telegraph Island. During the 19th century, Telegraph Island was a British Indian base, and reports claimed that soldiers stationed there eventually went mad, becoming hostile and unrecognizable. Micah called Pete, telling him he'd been bewitched by the telegraph machine. Pete refused to believe it, dismissing it as a trap set by Valda. He was determined to kill Valda himself to protect everyone. Meanwhile, Micah tossed the telegraph machine into a neutralizing agent, but Pete's condition didn't improve. Its influence was too strong. Pete left a note for Valda, challenging them to meet him at a scrapyard. Unsuspecting of Pete's state, Valda arrived as requested, only to be subdued by Pete. What followed was a brutal interrogation. Valda was utterly confused, denying everything. During the exchange, Pete noticed a pattern. Every time he heard a sound resembling telegraph rhythms, strange occurrences would follow. At that moment, Micah and Arty arrived at the scene. Pete, unsure of what was real, was further manipulated by Valda, who claimed that snipers were in place to kill Micah and Arty. Panicked, Pete used the walking cane to knock both of them away, preventing the supposed snipers from getting a clear shot. The blow nearly killed them. Desperate, Arty played an original recording, a master tape designed to reset neural rhythms. But Pete was too far gone in his hallucinations. Wielding the cane, he struck everyone again. Arty exclaimed that the telegraph's influence is too deep. He can't hear the music. As a last resort, Arty used the Tesla gun to knock Pete unconscious. Afterward, Pete finally listened to the music and returned to normal. Back at the villa, Pete began writing a self-reflection report. As he wrote, Irene suddenly appeared, talking at length about something. Pete barely listened. Instead, he gently touched her sexy face to confirm she was real. Just as he turned to show her his report, she disappeared. It seemed Irene had the ability to vanish instantly. The situation settled down for the moment. Later, Kate sent Micah a USB drive, saying it was something Pete had left with her. Pete insisted on seeing it. When they opened it, everyone was mortified. It was deeply embarrassing. Meanwhile, Micah's pet ferret fell ill, so she brought in Kelly, the town's only veterinarian. After Kelly left, Arty assigned tasks to the group. Given Pete's foolish behavior in the previous case, the board had extended his house arrest for another week. This time, the mission would be handled by Micah and Claudia. At a school in California, there's a wrestling team that hadn't won a single match in 7 years. But recently, they've been unstoppable, dominating every opponent like they've taken some kind of miracle drug. Naturally, the whole team underwent steroid testing, but the results came back clean. No banned substances. So, unless there's some sort of artifact involved, how could a struggling team suddenly turn into champions? What's even more puzzling is that 3 months ago, one of the team members mysteriously burst into flames and died while camping. Arty speculated that if an artifact was helping the team win, it might also be the cause of these bizarre deaths. With that in mind, Micah and Claudia immediately headed to the school. Claudia, participating as an intern for this mission, was beyond excited. However, the coach wasn't particularly cooperative and assigned a sidekick member to show them around. Claudia, who has a phobia of male nudity, had a mild panic attack in the locker room and had to step outside to catch her breath. While waiting outside, she witnessed something unbelievable. A team member spontaneously combusted right in front of her. The police arrived and ruled it an accidental death, marking the second unexplained fatality on the team. Micah and Claudia noticed the coach pulling out a medal and using it to motivate the team. Every member touched it before heading to practice. Could the artifact be the medal? Micah decided to confront the coach, while Claudia was tasked with investigating the team further. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.